Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Jones coming to you from Los Angeles, California. And today I am going to be joined by Kirstin Purtich. And we're going to be talking about a really fantastic garment in the museum's collection. And so I just want to say good morning to everybody in Los Angeles and good afternoon to everybody way over on the East Coast. And good evening to all the other people on the other side of the planet. I hope you are all having a great day or a great evening. I actually see Kirstin right now, so... Okay, hello, hello. There we go.
Hi.
Hey.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hoping my Wi-Fi holds out. We'll find out.
Okay, yes. I know that is such a tricky thing. And just so everybody knows, we did practice to make sure that the Wi-Fis would work. However, I was in my office, so I was a little nervous if I would mess it up being here at the house. But it's great to see you and welcome everybody. I want to give a quick bio for Kirstin before we get started for those of you who don't know her and are now going to be really privileged to know one of my favorite people, and I'm happy to say now a really good friend. This is Kirstin Purtich. She is a textile and fashion conservator and exhibition consultant based in Brooklyn. So she's in the afternoon while we're still in the morning. She has contributed to exhibitions at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Bard Graduate Center, the Richard H. Driehaus Museum in Chicago, the museum at FIT, and the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. From 2006 to 2009, she was part of the curatorial team at the American Federation of Arts. And for any of you who do not know the American Federation of Arts, it is wonderful. They are a nonprofit foundation that was founded in 1909, and they develop traveling exhibitions, catalogs. I mean, who knew that that was going on all the way back then? And I got to know Kirstin through another colleague, and we worked together. She has organized traveling exhibitions of fashion, architecture, and design, including designing the new Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the Glasgow style, which I would love to see, but also the FITA Museum's own sporting fashion, outdoor girls, 1800 to 1960. I know many of you recognize the catalog now, and I know this is backwards, but I just wanted to show you, here's the title page with these really phenomenal ladies right there. I love that photo. And I'm going to zoom in because here is Kirstin's name backwards right there. So we have worked together now more than 5 years on, or up 5 years on, and both collegially, on this project, this huge project, and of course the exhibition is about to kick off at the Frick in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in July 3rd it opens. And so I'm hoping, Kirstin, you'll be able to travel down to see that show.
I'm thrilled that it's opening somewhere a little nearer to me, quite frankly.
In LA, right.
Out of it. It's great. And I do actually have my copy of Sporting Fashion placed on the bookshelf, of course. You know,
how did that get placed just kind of perfectly right there?
It's just an accident.
Right. So, but also, Kirstin has been an intern with us because she left the American Federation of Arts to pursue, kind of adjust her career track away from conservation of historic fashion objects. Excuse me, yeah, curatorial of conservation objects. Oh my gosh! All right, I'm starting. She is switching her career path from curatorial to conservation of historic fashion objects. There we go. It's really that simple. And she has gone back to get yet another master's degree at FIT, which she has now completed. And she was an intern with us and did a lot of photography for our database, Past Perfect, which is being uploaded into our database, which will then be available for all of you who are researching when you come to the FITA Museum website, which I have to say is just launched. We've just launched our new website.
Yeah, I just browsed it last night. It looks great.
Oh, well, thank you. And it is, it's a work in progress. We're going to just keep making it better and better. But one of the things that I was able to draw Kirsten into was a really amazing object that has been recently donated to us and needs conservation. And what better way to have somebody who is so talented like Kirsten, and we have an object that needs desperately somebody like her to work together. And this is what brings us to today's discussion. So it's all about a very rare garment, Worth Bobergh.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's a silk taffeta ensemble from, I've narrowed the dates down by doing a lot of research into labels in other Worth Bobergh garments, and have figured it out that it would be somewhere between 1866 and 1868. I was very fortunate before the lockdown happened that I was able to go see other examples at the Met and at the Albany Institute of History and Art. And there are a few other examples of Worth Bobergh garments at, I believe, Philadelphia, the Palais Galliera, and a couple of other collections. But for the most part, this particular design house, which was Charles Frederick Worth's first design house, was only in business for 12 years. So things that survived are very few and far between. So it's amazing that you guys have this example. Yeah.
It is, and like you say, that I'm really surprised that there are so few of Worth Bobergh. It's when Worth founded in 1858, and actually I've got the one of the factures, one of the invoices here, and this one is from 1869. So just like almost maybe a year after our dress was made, and he was in partnership with Otto Bobergh, who was a Swede, and like you said, that the house as Worth Bobergh only existed for a short time, but they were phenomenally successful. But I'm surprised there's not more garments that have survived.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the example that's at the FIDM Museum and how it's been partially taken apart, I think it's entirely possible that things that did originally survive in the late 19th century got recycled into other garments. It's a lot of beautiful fabric, and you don't want that to go to waste. Like,
right.
That was a big investment for people. So.
And it was also the time, the 1860s, where you didn't have that really devastating tin weighting that came about in the later 19th century, which is caused a lot of the problems with the shattered silks that you see in almost every lining fabric, but also a lot of the outer fabrics. These incredibly beautiful patterned silks and so forth. But this material, which we are going to show everybody, is very strong, very stable, and like you said, is easily reused even a while later.
Right. Do you have some photos you could show everyone?
Yes, but I want to ask you, because we've had some questions come in from this past week, and we want to get to know you a little bit before we dive into the garments. So I just have a few questions. So, Kirsten, how did you become interested in textile and fashion conservation?
So it's kind of like a marriage of multiple interests. When I was first coming out of college, I thought I might go into costume design. I had applied to a bunch of internships in that field and a bunch of internships in museums, and I happened to get a museum one first, and that was just the path I went on. So I wound up in kind of this curatorial study of design history, fashion history, textiles, and wound up at the AFA and was very fortunate to work on shows like Sporting Fashion and really do more in the kind of decorative arts field for them, which was great. But I was also sitting behind a computer a lot of the time and doing a lot of administrative work, and I wasn't working with objects, and that's what I really wanted to get back to. So that's why I decided to go back to grad school a second time. I had originally gone to the Bard Graduate Center, also in Manhattan, for my first graduate degree in design history, working with your lovely colleague, Michelle Major. But this time around, I decided I wanted to go on the conservation track. I wanted to be working in a lab, actually touching objects, stitching, I had to go back to community college and take chemistry to get that requirement in there, which was interesting. But it's just like it's like a reorientation of very similar interests that I've had throughout my life. I grew up sewing. My aunt worked in the fashion industry. It's all just sort of like this amalgamation of interests coming together. And yeah, and I just finished, this project is my thesis at FIT and just got it approved in March, so I'm an official FIT grad.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that because Kirsten has written a 187-page. I mean, it seems more than a paper, but all about the gown history, its analysis. We're going to dive into some of that, but that paper is available for everybody to read. Am I correct?
Yes, because it's through ProQuest, just contact me if you want to read it. I have no problem sharing it. I'd love more people to see it. You can either go to my website, which is just my name.com, or you can email kpurtich, which is my first initial and my last name at Gmail, and happy to provide it.
That's great. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting read. It is so thoughtful, thought out. It's fantastic. Well, you've talked about your schooling and so forth, but I think it is interesting, especially for conservation, what's required of a conservator to be considered a conservator? What's that schooling knowledge that is needed? I mean, and we're talking specifically here for textile-based objects for the most part, but they're, a garment can have ceramic buttons or, all sorts of different kinds of materials. So what do you need to be a conservator?
Right. I think that's why I was drawn to, I'd say, fashion conservation specifically, because a lot of people who do textile conservation, they frequently will work on flat textiles, tapestries, which, not to say that those don't involve other materials that are not just fibers and fabrics, but because fashion, like you say, involves plastics, ceramics, all kinds of notions, I liked that it was a little bit more in the objects conservation field, which requires a much broader base of knowledge. Of course, you have to know on a molecular level what a silk versus a cotton looks like, but you also need to know how plastics behave and how they age over time, things like that. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does, and I think you mentioned earlier, it's frankly, the base is a lot of chemistry.
Yes, definitely. And I do think that sewing skills are kind of a must. Even in my small cohort of FIT, I think everybody had at least a baseline of knowledge of sewing skills coming in, because it's not even just working on garments, it's being able to put together mounts and being able to see in 3 dimensions. That's actually something that I've always admired in your lovely mount maker, Carolyn, who's just able to just visualize things from scratch.
So it's interesting. It's it's knowledge of history, knowledge of garment construction, chemistry, but then also studio arts. It sounds like.
Definitely.
Because I mean, especially for flat textiles, they have their own special mounts often, and then you have to deal with people almost in the framing field that is its own career in the archival framing field. But the sculpture, because we are dealing with the body, we're dressing, And
I mean, that was a big thing with this particular project, was that you knew that you didn't want to show these garments just flat in a vitrine. You wanted to be able to show them on a body. That's what the Fit Museum always does. And being able to put these things into 3 dimensions makes such a difference to understanding how they were worn and how they were used and the social life of those objects.
Right. Okay, so moving on. What has been the most surprising aspect of garment, working on garments, or what have you found in a pocket that was maybe disgusting? I mean, because you're kind of first line in there with
very true. You sometimes find things like used tissues and that sort of thing, more so in 20th century things like that. Just in terms of this particular project, I can think of the fact that I was able to compare to other Worth and Bobergh garments. I was able to see how things were put together in the Worth and Bobergh workshop, which was something like 2,000 seamstresses by the time they were fully fledged and everything. And just seeing the level of finishing and how it could be very, very rough. You see inside the skirt waistbands, it's just kind of hacked off and made so that it fits the woman, because you wouldn't have that part of the garment actually touching the woman's body, that you'd have a petticoat, a crinoline, all of that between her and the skirt. Whereas something like the jacket, where you'd be taking it on and off and people would see the inside, all of that is beautifully finished.
Right.
And the seams are to the inside, so it slides on nicely. And just really getting at that like lived experience of the garments was really valuable.
Aside, of course, from the Worth Bobergh ensemble, is there a particular like dream garment or period that you would love to work on from a conservation standpoint?
Oh gosh, I would love to do something like very old, like 17th century. That would be a dream. Not a whole lot of that stuff survives for obvious reasons. It deteriorates, it gets reused. I'm also very interested in the very early 20th century, but a lot of that material, because it's all these gauzy fabrics, a lot of it does not survive or is in terrible condition, but I also like a challenge. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I would say those two. I'm also very interested in working with like modern materials and plastics, and just seeing
There's
how
so much research going into that part of the field now, especially as the kind of 60s, 70s plastic and vinyl garments start to really show their age.
Right. I mean, they had no idea when they were making that stuff that it was going to potentially just combust, you know,
Right.
or start leaking plasticizers, or that stuff was not made for posterity necessarily.
Right. Well, I can't really help you with the plastics. I mean, we've got stuff in our collection, and I'm not trying to give anything away, but I'm giving a hint that maybe I'll be able to help you with the 17th century dream of yours. So, and that's a little hint to everybody else that we might have a really interesting project down the road. So, okay, let's please dive into Worth and Bobergh and show some pretty pictures. All right, so what makes the Worth and Bobergh garment so rare? We've talked about the fact that there's not many of them that have survived. So, Kirsten, what are we looking at here?
So this is a fashion plate that not a whole lot of fashion plates have survived, in addition to not a whole lot of garments surviving from Worth and Bobergh, again, because of that very short time frame. But this is an illustration of 2 daytime ensembles by the House of Worth and Bobergh. As you start to see the garments that are in the FITM collection, you'll see some similarities in the way that the shapes are all kind of interchangeable, and that was one of Charles Frederick Worth's like major innovations in fashion. That was how he was able to have such great output and be so efficient, was that you would tweak a sleeve, you'd tweak some trim, and you'd have a whole new garment. So you'll see some of these details, like the big swagged up polonaise skirt and trim on a sleeve. You'll see that repeated a lot.
So honestly, it was very industrial. He took a very skilled handcraft that was rather slow, you know, and court driven, because this is still court driven, so it's not a lot of people, and industrialized it, right? You know, in interchangeable parts, you know, the same sleeves and multiple fabrics, and suddenly you have, you know, multiple dresses.
Exactly. And what I always find interesting about his early output, later on in his career and in the career of his sons who take over the house, there's like this really big emphasis on patterned fabrics. In these early years, it's a lot of monochrome. So just getting to know that kind of design idiom of his through looking at all these garments has been really interesting.
Just to go back to this real quick, I mean, this is a series of, I think it's 16 fashion plates. Is that correct? It was do you know why these 16 were created?
That is a good question. I believe they were associated with a certain publication that I'm forgetting the name of right now, but it's in my paper. And that's the sort of thing that often will fall out of periodicals that are preserved in libraries. So it's not necessarily, if they have it at the National Library in France, they don't necessarily have those pieces scanned in with that, because people have recycled it, sold it, done something else with it. So,
Yeah, because honestly, these are really the only series of Worth and Bobergh fashion illustrations that I can think
right.
of off the top of my head.
I do also know that it's been documented that because Worth and Bobergh was able to get an imperial designation fairly early on, I think in 1864, I want to say, they didn't really need to advertise as much. They already had the sign off of the court, so
Right.
they've got in advertising in that way. So it's not like they have to be putting fashion plates in every periodical.
Yeah, and they had a built-in patron because of the court.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
because everybody would follow, what the court was doing.
Right.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Mhm.
It's fascinating how the system works. I mean, I honestly think that that early fashion system, especially with Worth and those interchangeable parts, it's really like, did Henry Ford meet Worth at some point and kind of like, wait, I could do this with a car, because it's exactly the same, process basically.
Definitely.
Well, should we look at the garment itself?
We should.
And did I ever show this photo to you?
No, you never did. Yeah,
Oh,
I've
I'm
never seen
sorry.
it in 3D.
Okay, so first let me say that the garment is 5 pieces, and we're going to talk about the 5 pieces. And I've known about it for 20 years or more, and 20 years. And I really wanted to acquire it so badly. And it was in a private collection, and I would always ask, how's the W&B doing, and so forth. So, and I have to say that it was generously donated to us in 2018 by Martin Kammer, who is one of the world authorities of historic dress, one of the greatest dealers who's ever existed. And he's out of Switzerland, and he really generously donated it. Now, this photo is from a slide he sent me, probably 15 years ago, tiny little slide, and I had it scanned. And he dressed it after he got it. And this is the kind of the overall of this ensemble. In what it will,
you can see how much that looks like one of those fashion plates. It's like,
it does.
yeah.
Yeah, look at this. Hold on, let me fold this back. That's a really good idea. That's a great comparison.
Yeah, totally.
You can see the
So
drape,
you
the
can see
swag.
that era of almost getting into the bustle, but not quite. It's still a crinoline, but it's sort of projecting backwards. A lot of emphasis on the skirt. Yeah.
Yeah. Martin bought it years and years and years ago, and he held on to it basically because it needs conservation. There are elements of it that are fragmented, but because it's such a rare garment and it's basically complete, it was highly desirable. So I can go back to this anytime anybody wants to see the picture again. Just say, Kevin, please hold that picture up. And this is the famous label.
Right. Which is the key, really, because if we didn't have that, we wouldn't know for sure that it was a Worth and Bobergh. And as I think I mentioned before, I was able to do kind of a catalog of different labels and other examples and really narrow down exactly when this particular label was used, because it went through a few different iterations. You see in the middle, it's got the little imperial stamp. That's what means Empress Eugenie has said this is great.
And also, I think it's really interesting because there were subtle changes, such as like the word, the H's kind of look like weird M's, and the line, when you line it up here, later ones it extends out, I think it is, or something like that. So there's all these subtle changes, and in Kirstin's paper, she has created the best running timeline of the Worth and Bobergh label and its changes anywhere. It's absolutely fantastic, and that's why it's really, it's going to be easy now for anybody who finds one of these or any of the museums that have them in collections to really specifically date when their garment is from.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about the garment itself. I've got, you asked us to photograph each of the pieces, and it was perfect timing because we were doing a shoot, and so let's run through the pieces, shall we? Tell us, Kirsten, what it is that we're looking at.
So right now what you're looking at is the day bodice, and there's only one sleeve of it that is remaining. Obviously it's been detached, that's what you see at the bottom here. And these are front and back views. This is your standard conservation pre-treatment photography, just showing it flat, no intervention, documenting what it looked like before you did anything to it.
And I'm glad you told me about this.
Yes, always good to have scale.
Right.
Yeah,
I
and
would have
honestly,
taken all these photos without a measuring.
the fact that COVID happened was actually kind of beneficial in certain ways because I had my little photos that I had taken down in storage, but I didn't have anything near this professional. And because things got a little bit delayed because of lockdowns and everything, you were able to do this, and it really is a boon to the project. So at the top here, what you have are 3 remaining pieces of what would have been an evening bodice. It was very common in this era and kind of an innovation of Worth's to have interchangeable bodices for day and evening. So you would wear the same skirt and overskirt, but when you go to the ball, you wear your evening bodice. So that's all that's left of that. This right here in the middle is a paletot, aka a jacket. It's a period term for a jacket that's kind of loose fitting through the body, again, front and back views. And there are both sleeves of that are remaining, and that's what you see down here. Presumably the sleeves were taken off at some point shortly after the garments were made, possibly to update the silhouette. We don't really know, but they're clearly somebody knew what they were doing when they took them apart because they didn't just hack at it. They very carefully picked the seams. So yeah.
For those of you who know the late 1980s catalog, The Opulent Era, which was an exhibition on Worth, Doucet, and Pingat, those 3 couture houses that was at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Ann Coleman, Elizabeth Ann Coleman wrote this book. And it's great. It's one of my all-time favorite books when I was younger. And in it, I remember her writing that Worth and Bobergh outer garments are some of the rarest pieces that have survived. So it's interesting that we have this garment, but also that it retained its outer jacket, because there are very, very few outer garments of Worth and Bobergh.
Right. And I think it is worth mentioning that the paletot in this case seems to have the most sweat staining, and we've through research kind of surmised the fact that it was probably repurposed as some kind of fancy dress costume. That would be a very easy thing to throw in the costume trunk in the family and people take it out because it's so lightweight and would just fit over anything.
Right.
There isn't as much sweat staining on the other garments, so maybe that's the case. So here at the top, I believe.
Oh, wait. Sorry. Here, oh, no, wait. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Yeah.
All right, you're right the first time.
I'm sorry.
So at the top and middle registers here, we have a skirt and an overskirt. And the overskirt, you notice, is longer in the front than in the back, or longer in the back than in the front. And that's because it has ties inside. So it ties up and makes that kind of bouffant silhouette in the back that you saw in the photo where it was dressed on a mannequin. So it's 2 layers, is the idea. And that skirt is the one that I was talking about, where it's got the very unfinished inside. So
it's fascinating. I mean, it looks, I think, to anybody just glancing at this, that it's been chopped up, it's been altered, and so forth. But as you said earlier, it's just this kind of hackneyed way that the couture houses, not just Worth and Bobergh, but others in this kind of early label time period worked. It wasn't this kind of what we think of as perfectly fine, absolutely, flawless, couture clothing. A lot of that kind of came later, that ideal, and really the kind of the refining of this couture process.
Absolutely. And it should be mentioned that if you zoom in on the skirt again, you can see the trim at the bottom. Part of the reason that you would do all the alterations at the waistline is you wouldn't want to disturb all of that. You put all the work into putting all these pleats on. That's done. And once you put it on the woman, it needs to be shortened 5 inches. Let's take it out of the top. So yeah. And then at the bottom here, These were the detached pieces of trim that were donated with the ensemble. I believe there are about 8 to 10 of them, a lot of self-pleated fabric, there's a bow, there's a ribbon. And of that, we have determined that about 5 of them can be fairly confidently reattached to various of the garments. That's something we don't do lightly at all. In conservation, you have to justify any kind of decision like that in a fairly bulletproof way, and always document what you're doing, just in case somebody comes along and has more research and finds out, oh no, that's wrong. You need to ideally be able to reverse it, or at least deal with it in some way, and justify your decision. So
We've had a lot of discussions when you were here before COVID about placement, stitch. I mean, we're looking at the stitch holes. We're looking at any thread remainders. Do those threads match on this piece that's detached and the piece where we think it might have originally been placed? And also looking at those fashion plates and other garments of the era, you know, what was the design aesthetic, you know, because we're not interested in redesigning this thing.
right, exactly. Like for instance, the very easy example I think is the detached bow that's just by itself. You see in a lot of the fashion plates and in a lot of the extant garments that there's always a bow right at the center front of the bodice. So that seemed like a lot, and there was matching thread fragments. So that
and
sense.
even because the back of the bow has a
little hook. Yeah.
little hook, and you can see where the hook was placed, so it held it secure. You know, so you just find this tiny little bit of evidence, and suddenly, you know, it starts to make sense to you. Also, I think, Kirsten, you know, you talked about the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It helped to slow us down.
Yeah, definitely.
So that
I mean,
we could look and analyze.
Even the best conservation treatment in like a very advanced lab in the best museum, they don't necessarily always have the time to do the kind of in-depth analysis that I had the chance to do because I was doing it for my thesis, and I wound up like being delayed for a year essentially. Like I got to do scale drawings of every single garment and really look at the construction in detail. In a normal case, you would not have the luxury of that time.
Right. And I want to say also, none of this is ever done without a great deal of consultation as well, and talking with other colleagues, both at the curatorial side. You know, Christina and I have had lots of conversations about it, and we've talked to other people about, you know, the Worth garments and so forth, but also for you, talking with not only your colleagues, your FIT, but also the other institutions that you have visited to look at the Worth and Bobergh pieces, and our conservator, Cara Brunel, whom you will be working with directly for this on this project.
I'm incredibly indebted to her advice. I mean, she was the one who was able to sit with me with the garments and be like, tell me from her years and years of experience, we may not be able to get these tied line stains out. I've worked with taffeta in the past. Just learning from her experience with other garments and other collections, and also knowing you guys for a really long time and knowing your wants and needs and priorities with conservation treatment. So, yeah.
So you mentioned the detail of the puffing. I'm amazed because there is a sleeve missing on the day bodice, and then the evening bodice is just fragmented. And this is a detail of that fabric with the puffings at the bottom of the skirt itself.
Right. So
now,
like a large part of the treatment is really going to be humidification and just realigning a lot of these pleats, bringing it back to life, because it's been sitting in a box for however long. Not ideal conditions for something this delicate. And taffeta is just notorious for creasing horribly.
Right. Can you tell us about the fabric?
So the fabric is, if anyone knows what a changeable silk is, it goes by several different names. Sometimes you hear it as changeant. My French accent is terrible. But what that means is that you have one color of wefts and one color of warps when you weave the fabric. And I actually have a little sample of the fabric that we're going to use for some of the reconstructed elements. So maybe you could see that it is blue in one direction and orange in the other. I don't know if that's going to come across.
Well, and how astounding that you found that. And I printed this out from your thesis.
Great.
And
yeah, I was incredibly, this happened maybe like a week before New York shut down. I went to Mood Fabrics and happened to find an incredibly similar taffeta. I found two and we picked one of them. And I just bought practically a whole bolt because I knew we would need it. But it's such a rare fabric. It's not something that you could just custom dye because of that particular quality of the fabric that really sparkles under light. You can't just dye it brown and assume that that's going to really match in gallery lighting.
Yeah, the samples that you sent, I took it down to our gallery and to the light levels that we try to keep everything set at to see which one matched as closely as possible with the actual garment. This is a piece of fabric from the ensemble, and we don't know exactly where this piece is from. It's probably the evening bodice, and so you took this with you when you went shopping. Yeah.
Yes, in a polyethylene bag and with your permission, of course. That's
Right.
not something you normally are doing. Just like,
Right.
oh, well, bring the ensemble with me.
Yeah. That wouldn't have been possible, but the fact that we had this smaller piece actually helped a great deal. And it is interesting because the fabric is so beautiful. It's blue and orange, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So it really does have such a beautiful play of color, which you couldn't ever just dye a flat piece of fabric. It would show so obviously.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, if you had all the money in the world, I'm sure you could have something custom woven, but we're working with, this is limited budgets.
Yeah,
limited time,
exactly.
limited budget, you know?
Exactly, yeah. So one of the things that I think is really fabulous that came out of the your being able to kind of slow down the work on your project was your absolutely stunning drawings. And so I want to show everybody Kirstin's beautiful artwork for one thing. She's a marvelous, she has such a beautiful sense of drawing, the clarity, the simplicity, yet you can see all the details.
So these are all at 1/8 inch scale, just FYI. Took very detailed measurements, thankfully thought to do that before everything happened, and worked these up. And also the professional photos really helped to back up certain things that I'd missed. But yeah, so yeah, you can see the fringe here on, I guess would be the left. And then this is a detail of one of the cuffs that has not just the self fabric, but there are little elements of white tulle or white or organza. Is that right?
Yeah.
I always forget. Yeah. So yeah. And even just seeing all the different materials that went into these garments, I thought that was very rewarding and cool to analyze.
Mm-hmm. You know. This is the back.
Yes.
And also, I think it's interesting because, you know, it shows everything without all the wrinkles and so forth that you were talking about. And so you can really make out the structure, including elements of how the garment is at present. Because as we know from analyzing it, this was actually kind of swagged up in a polonaise.
Right. And we know that because of thread fragments, stitch holes, and that is another thing that is going to be reshaped in the course of treatment. So yeah. Yes, and you can see down here below, I had a lot of fun drawing the label.
Right. And here is, and I actually did not print out every one of Kirstin's drawings. I mean, it's an extensive portfolio, and every one of these is in her her document. So, I recommend it to anybody interested in both conservation, of course, and the French couture industry in the middle of the 19th century, and Worth Bobergh, but also just pattern construction and slow looking at historic garments that really helps to inform you in a way than just quickly looking at something and think you've taken it all in.
Yeah, I think drawing in general, I think that is a skill that any conservator, anybody studying things should have, because it is such a way of exploring things with a pen and paper. So yeah, this we're looking at the day bodice, and this is like a detail of the interior down below. So you can see the darts and how there's a facing for the buttonholes. And there's also a little attached pleated belt that you see on the left. I don't know if anybody can even see this level of detail, but
Right, right. We have a question that's just come through with one of our visitors, and it says, do a mock-up using muslin. You know, are you going to do a mock-up using muslin? Is that something that you've thought about? That is a common practice.
it is a very common practice. It's very useful. Sometimes you'll do it not at full scale, just to like save space and save fabric. I'm actually pulling a lot from another treatment on a Worth and Bobergh that was done at the MFA Boston by Johanna Tower, who I think now works in private practice. But she had done something very similar where she had to like completely reimagine a skirt that had been repurposed for fancy dress. And so she did a half-scale muslin of the skirt and overskirt. And I think that is something that I am going to do so that I don't have to be manipulating the taffeta, because it's very delicate, and I don't want to be pulling anything and causing more damage. That's always a risk.
Do you think you're going to do it as a half scale as well?
I think so. If we can find a good mannequin, that's always with the 1860s ideal body. You're not dealing with just like a regular half-scale mannequin, so I probably have to custom build something. I haven't quite figured out the details of that just yet.
I know that lay figures have been used in the past by some institutions when they've done, smaller scale. However, the lay figures aren't necessarily kind of that very hourglass silhouette that you find in the 19th century. So, it could be, here's another thing, you have to adapt to everything. If you found a lay figure and then you built that lay figure up to about the proportions that you would need before you would do the mock-up.
Right. I think regardless, anything would need to be custom padded out to the measurements of these garments, because it was a real woman who wore these. It wasn't just an ideal sample size.
Right. And also, mock-ups are often done because of reconstruction. Taking a garment that maybe had been very altered and trying to figure out what that original construction might have been at any given time. Whereas our garment has not really been altered size-wise so much. It's more elements have been removed, and we have to, place them back together, except for the poor little evening bodice, which really almost doesn't exist. Here is the interior of that day bodice. Mm-hmm.
So one thing that we have kind of come to in other research, looking at what's left on the garments, it seems like there were some kind of engagement that came out of the sleeves, because they're actually quite surprisingly short for that time period. They probably hit around elbow length, and there's a little bit of fragment of chiffon tucked inside there. So we think that'll be something that'll be reconstructed with contemporary fabric in order to show it.
Yeah, as it would have been. It's just these. You can see it's almost been pulled off because there's just these threads of where it was still pleated and the kind of fabric. And you found that fabric as well, which is quite amazing.
Yeah. That one wasn't quite as hard, but
Sure. And then here is the skirt. I did not print the overskirt. Sorry about that.
They basically look the same. So.
Oops. Sorry, I'm dropping my papers.
So yeah, the skirt is basically a gored skirt. It's got an opening in one side so you can have a pocket. Actually, the skirt has the pocket. The overskirt has just a little slit so you can access the pocket on one side. And then hooks in the back. Surprisingly, all of the original hardware is still attached, as far as I could tell.
In the layout of the pleated fabric. So after you took all the time to examine the dress here, you photographed it yourself, took some measurements, took some notes. You went back to New York, finished schooling. We were able to photograph the pieces, each and every piece for you, front, back, and details and so forth. You were then had the time, because of the pandemic, to do all of the drawings. Once that's finished, is that what brought you to your thought process about then how to take this treatment forward?
Yeah, exactly. There was also a little bit of microscopic analysis of the fibers, but I kind of already knew going in it's probably all silk, and that was confirmed. That involved taking samples while I was still in LA and bringing back to the FIT lab. I did get a chance to take a few samples from the Albany garments and see that a lot of the threads appeared, at least to a microscopic eye, to be the same, which was interesting to see how the workshop operated. They had one kind of thread that they used for all the skirt waistbands, that sort of thing. But yeah, go ahead.
No, that's very interesting because, to be able to compare and contrast with the few garments that have survived, to say like, oh, look, this, because as far as I know, these workshops, it's, that idea of having a breakdown of these different parts, and you just use different fabrics, different trims, and you make all these garments, even though they're all the same patterns. It was also the workshops that were broken down into specifics. There wasn't one seamstress who created an entire garment from beginning to end.
No, it was like an assembly line. I think the Ford analogy is actually very apt. There was somebody who did sleeves, there was somebody who did the pleated trim, and you wouldn't see an entire garment through as a single person.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense that, the waistbands, the waist areas, the skirts might have all the same silk threads because that's what was in that atelier. Whereas over in the sleeves, you're going to find probably something similar, but maybe slightly different. It just depends on who was ever running that part of the workshop and where they were ordering their supplies at the time.
Right. Yeah.
So so being able to compare and contrast also with the Albany at Boston from the report that was done for their reconstruction, and then also at the Met, to see the sewing techniques, I think was very interesting as well, and how they matched quite nicely.
Right.
From one dress to the other.
Also being able to compare how these other institutions have treated or intervened in some way in their various garments. One of the two Worth and Bobergh ensembles that Albany has, at some point in the past, somebody combined the I think it was either the jacket or the day bodice and the overskirt to update the silhouette, and they've left it that way and have shown it that way, whereas Boston decided they wanted to show a full evening ensemble. I think it was evening ensemble, and so they opted to really intervene more in the skirt so that it could be shown as it was originally worn. And just like comparing and contrasting different institutions' approach to conservation was really helpful and really informed what we decided to do, and what informed my very, very long report.
Right. I think it's interesting also that every one of the garments has had to have some kind of treatment to them. None of them seems to have survived fully intact from this time period.
Right.
So one of the things that's so interesting to me is Kirstin's drawings of what is going to happen with the conservation. Every single step has been planned out and color-coded. I really hope that this comes out on the screen here. First, you have, these are the photos that we took and you've seen just flat out with our photographer, Brian Davis. But you took this and you color-coded and marked all of the various aspects of either the similar damage, just one kind of mark or something like that. So it's all very charted and graphed.
Exactly. And that's why it's very key to have a ruler in there so you can tell where it is and how big it is.
Right. And the just all these different marks, I hope you can see that because it was all charted and graphed out to know what that damage is and what is going to have to be looked at more closely, or can it be treated? Can it not be treated? Is it something that's going to have to be left alone? Is it original, or was it later alterations?
And
And then,
once all the treatment is done, we'll redo all of those photographs and
right,
have like a post-treatment assessment, basically.
right.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward toward the day when it's done and we can then dress her magnificently and photograph her all the way around. That'll be really fun. These are the drawings that I just adore, Kirsten. So tell us about these.
So because I couldn't be with the garments, because I was in New York and the garments are in LA, and because they're so fragile in their state, I found that it was helpful to draw the ensemble as it would be mounted to really visualize how all of these different parts fit together. Fit them, like I mentioned, wants to show it on a mannequin, wants to show it as it was in 1866 to 1868. And really understanding how the day bodice would fit over the waistband of the skirt, and then the jacket would fit over that. And this color coding that you see is denoting reconstructed elements. That's going to be the additional missing sleeve of the day bodice, along with the trim at the cuff of the sleeves and a trim at the neckline, which, because all of those things are new, I've decided that we're going to attach all of those to a very lightweight underbodice that can remain completely separate, where I'm not actually stitching anything to the original garments, but once you dress it on a mannequin, you can see it all together and see it in all its glory. And that'll be stored with the garments and just labeled as such. So that's the red. And then the blue things that you see up there, those are actually reattached elements from those fragments that you saw in one of those pre-treatment photos. So that's the bow, and then there's a little like bias self strip that'll go around the neck.
That's one of the things that I thought was so very innovative that you've come up with. The idea is we don't want to fool anybody to make them think that like that sleeve that's being reconstructed was the original sleeve.
Right.
When you're looking at the garment on display, you don't want to be distracted by something that is not an original element. But you also don't want to affect what has come down to us today as the original. And I just think the idea of doing a totally separate underbodice with the pleated trim for the neck, the sleeve with its pleated trim, as the elements that are being added back to the garment, was such a great idea.
Yeah.
And then this is the ensemble with the paletot.
Right. Yes. So ideally, this is how it will be eventually shown and mounted all together. This would be your full daytime ensemble for going out in the world. Yeah.
So you can see those blue elements are some of the pleated pieces that are now separated, but they match both the size around the arm side and the shape perfectly, and stitch marks and threads. So that's why it was determined that those were the missing elements on the paletot.
And in addition, some of the fashion plates show that kind of detail. So we could say with some certainty, yes, that's where those went.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is, it's so wonderfully involved, and it's a collaborative project. Kirsten, how long do you think it's going to take to do the conservation?
That's a good question. Anytime you do a treatment proposal like this in conservation, you would provide some kind of estimate of the time it will require. I gamed it out, and I think it will take a total of 144 hours. You estimate as best as you can, and that's all broken down into the various steps. Some of that may shift. Some of that work, especially the reconstruction work, may wind up happening in New York. I don't necessarily need to be with the garments for that. So what that basically translates to is about a month worth of steady, like 40-hour-a-week work. So that's the plan, hopefully for end of July is when I'll start doing
And
it.
you're going to do a reconstruction of what we think the evening bodice probably looked like with the materials that survive from it, but also in comparison to other bodices, both Worth and Bobergh and unlabeled garments from the era. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Do you have a photo of that one? Or
I did not print that out. No.
I think I have it in my little portfolio, so I can show that. Hopefully I can manage to do this. So that's the front there. Cute little short sleeves with a bow at the apex of the sleeve. That's actually a swatch of the fabric. And then the back, I've decided that it would make a lot of sense that it would have a bow in the back, so it's going to have either attached or separate belt with a big bow in the back.
And we will display, so one of the questions that, actually there's two questions. I want to, let me see if I can read these. Ooh, where'd it go? Miss Fixer, I love that. How do you plan on displaying the garment, letting the public to know about its reconstruction? And Historical Beauty suggests, and I think this is a great idea, of videoing, doing some video aspects of this. I love that idea. So the idea is that once all the conservation is finished, we want to host an exhibition in our history gallery all about conservation, using the Worth and Bobergh as the thesis piece. And Kirsten is going to be our guest curator / conservator.
Wearing all the hats.
That's right. That's right. And to really show, we are planning on displaying her incredibly beautiful drawings so that you can see them up close and really talking about the history, a synopsis history of Worth and Bobergh, the house, the tour industry at the time, but really looking at the garment and what it took to bring it back to hopefully the way that we can fully display it so people can see what it was like in the day, have fashion plates to show the comparisons and similar aspects to this garment, and perhaps even a couple of other pieces in the museum's collection, historic garments, that show this kind of full range of fashion at the time.
Right. And I know you have, I don't know if this is still in the works, but you've talked about maybe showing the dressed mannequin on a turntable so you can see the effect of light.
I'm really into these turning mannequins now. We did that with our Alexander McQueen peacock dress, and everybody loved it. And they would just sit there and film while the whole thing was turning. I loved it. And then they, And the whole point of this ensemble is it's incredibly beautiful fabric, but if you just stand in front of it and you don't see this necessarily as much of this play of light. So the idea that, we have it on a turntable so you can see it all the way around the garment, but also that beautiful chanson of the fabric from this orange to this beautiful sky blue. I'm just looking to see, because we have just a few minutes left, if there are any questions. So Kirsten, is there anything else that you would like to mention about this project? Because I thank you so much for coming and joining today and kind of talking all of us through such a wonderful opportunity for the FIDM Museum with your talents, and we thank you for it.
I mean, this has been so much fun, and it's honestly an honor to be able to work on something so high profile as like an emergent conservator. I never thought in a million years I'd get to work on something so important and so rare. So yeah, and get to spend so much time with it, really. I know when I told you that I was thinking about doing a treatment-based thesis, we looked at various different garments in the FIDM collection, but this really just seemed like the one that had the most meat to it and the most research potential. And I'm glad it worked out. I can't wait to see it in all its glory again.
Absolutely. You are going to become the go-to conservator for all the Worth and Boberghs in the world. So anybody out there who's got a Worth and Bobergh that needs some treatments, Kirsten is going to be going into her practice, and it would be fantastic. And then, of course, once the treatment's over, if any of you want to donate your Worth and Bobergh to the FIDM Museum, let's talk.
There got to be some sitting in a trunk somewhere that people just don't know what it is.
Absolutely. I know that there are like 2 or 3 at the Philadelphia Museum of Art that were donated, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, that came out of a family trunk. The Museum of the City of New York has maybe
Okay.
5
Hmm.
that are, really very beautiful and, as far as I know, in quite amazing condition. So they're there, and and who knows how many are exist, but their labels are just not, intact anymore. So. Yep, it's incredible what's out there fashion history wise. That's why we love doing these collection conversations, to share what we have found, but also to say, hey, keep an eye out, because everything that comes to light informs all of us. So thank you again, Kirsten, for joining me today. I can't believe the hours is already past. It always goes so fast because we're having so much fun. But I wish you the best, and I am looking forward to seeing you here in Los Angeles at the end of July to actually start the hands-on treatment.
Exactly. Well, thank you. All right.
All right, everybody. I hope you have a really great week. We'll see you in a couple of weeks for our next collection conversation. And we wish you all the best, and stay safe and stay healthy. Okay? Bye-bye.